Yeah, I think so. Hello, welcome to another live chat with me, Monica Cardenas for Gadfly City. And my guest today is Ira Rheingold, the Executive Director of NACA, the National Association for Consumer Advocates. Don't forget to subscribe to Gadfly City on Substack and YouTube, wherever you're watching. So thank you, Ira, for being here today to tell us about NACA.
Sure, my pleasure.
Can you start by telling me a little bit about the work NACA does and who its members are?
Sure. So, we're an organization dedicated to consumer protection. Our membership are the attorneys around the country who only represent consumers. We have pretty strict guidelines about who can be a member. You can't be representing a business against consumers. So, these are the attorneys, both legal aid and private attorneys and public attorneys who represent consumers and on the ongoing battle against fraud and bad practices that we see all across the country, even more so these days than ever before.
Mm. And when was it founded? And I'm just curious about the timing because I want to know more about why and what
Sure.
sort of consumer exploitation was happening at the time.
Sure. Well, I mean, we've sort of expanded a lot. I came to NACA about 25 years ago, and it was around maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 years before I came to NACA in 2001. Um, it grew out in some ways. I think our growth came about in part because of the financial crisis, the predatory lending crisis. In the There's a longer story here. Back in the 60s and 70s, Congress passed a number of consumer protection laws that allowed consumers to protect themselves, allowed them to bring their own lawsuits against companies that exploit them.
Hmm.
Typically, not a lot of attorneys do these type of cases, but in fact, there's a real area of growth here. There's a real opportunity for consumers who actually don't have to typically don't need to pay for their attorneys. The attorneys get paid by the company through something called fee shifting. When you bring a case and you win the case, the bad guy pays your attorney's fees. Anyway, there was an opportunity for attorneys to do that, and part of our mission was to teach both legal aid attorneys and private attorneys that this can be a good career, that you can do good, you can do well by doing good, that you can actually represent the good guys. You can graduate law school, be proud of the work that you do, represent consumers against companies who are exploiting people, and make a living and raise a family and do all those important things that we do when we go to law school and graduate. I think our growth sort of expanded in part because of the financial crisis. My work before I came to NACA, I was a legal services attorney for a long time, representing tenants, representing consumers, dealing with the mortgage crisis back in Chicago in the 90s, dealing with the landlord-tenant crisis, dealing with car exploitation, dealing with privacy concerns, dealing with the sort of a whole panoply of the financial service market taking advantage of consumers. So since 2001, we've seen real growth in the number of attorneys doing this kind of work. Still not nearly enough,
Hmm.
but I think it's an opportunity for attorneys who want to do well and to represent consumers. And that's sort of our mission is to make sure that attorneys who are being treated badly have an opportunity to be represented in court.
And what I was asking before, what sort of exploitation was there?
Well, in my day, it was really the predatory lending crisis.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the mortgage crisis. I was working in Chicago, in poor parts of Chicago, and we were seeing neighborhoods being destroyed by home equity fraud. We saw people,
Mm,
mostly minority, Black communities, African American, Latino communities, being devastated by these loans that people could not afford, that was stealing and stripping equity away from people's homes. Um, and really destroying neighborhoods. We
mhm,
saw that in Chicago, and then we saw it around the country. And then it led to the financial crisis in 2008. People like
mhm.
me, back in the 1990s and early 2000s, were screaming at the top of our lungs, "This is exploitation. This cannot last. This is a bad product." Unfortunately, nobody listened to us, and it led to we had a number of solutions along the way, but it led to the financial crisis. But it was not only mortgages at that point; it was anything that people had that had a value. If you're low or moderate income and you had something of value, there were people either trying to take it away from you or trying to make it more expensive for you or not making or and not allowing you to afford it. So we saw lots of auto
Mm,
financing fraud. One of the big issues we saw was around debt collection and the collection of debts that people don't owe. There was a growth of something called the debt buying industry,
mhm,
where companies would sell old debts and people would buy, and these debt companies would buy them for pennies on the dollar and then bring all these massive cases against consumers for an enormous amount of money, most of which they didn't owe, but were simply fee upon fee upon fee.
mm,
So
mhm,
we saw all of that. We've seen the growth of the use of credit reports, the invasions of people's privacy, the financial exploitation of your own private information, people's financial information no longer being their own, but in fact being used to determine whether you qualify for a job or whether you qualify for an
okay.
apartment or you qualify for buying a car or a mortgage, and oftentimes those credit reports are inaccurate, filled with mistakes, and lead to all sorts of problems. So you sort of had this growth, both sort of the growth of the internet age, the growth of fintech products, all that stuff has bubbled up in the last 25
Mhm.
years and simply led to more extreme exploitation of people. And we've seen fits and starts of our government trying to solve it. The CFPB was I was involved in helping pass that law that created the CFPB and
Can
the
you tell us
Dodd-Frank law.
the full name?
Oh, sorry, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau,
Thank you.
which was a very effective government agency until this current administration has set out to destroy it. But during the previous 4 years, it was really effective in trying to end a lot of the exploitation and holding banks and financial institutions and other entities accountable. And we were working hand in hand, private attorneys and legal services attorneys were working with regulators who were trying to stop all of the bad things that we see every single day.
And so have you seen a growth in that exploitation since the
Oh yeah.
dismantling of
So I would say you can mark the date down as January 20th, 2025 is
really?
the date that you saw things really begin to pick up. Um, One of the common themes, so we just came off a conference with about 300 of our members gathering to sort of do education and talk about sort of the things that we're seeing. And I would say that every single consumer attorney I talked to said their phone is ringing off the hook,
Mm,
that they are seeing more. You name the space where people buy goods, people are being taken advantage of, whether it's cars, whether it's any kind of product, whether it's your payment systems,
mm,
whether they charge you. I mean, it's all the little niggling fees. I mean, you saw in the last administration this effort to stop some of the junk fees that were
mhm.
happening, right? So, but we're seeing more problems in the mortgage market. We're seeing more problems in the landlord tenant market. We're seeing more problems in the auto finance market. We're seeing more problems in the credit reporting and the credit and the debt collection marketplace. And again, it's because a lot of those entities don't feel like there's a federal regulator keeping an eye on them, because in fact, there is no federal regulator keeping an eye on them anymore. And so the attorneys who are trying to pick up that slack, my members, legal services attorneys, private attorneys, are getting inundated with calls. And unfortunately, over the last decade, the Supreme Court has not only done real damage in a lot of other areas of the law, but they've done real damage to the consumer protection laws and made it much more difficult for consumers to protect themselves. So not only has it been a fundamental attack on government regulation that protects consumers, but there's actually been a fundamental attack on consumers' rights to protect themselves as well.
Can you tell us about some of those Supreme Court decisions?
Yes, there's a couple of areas, and if I get too technical or too detailed, you can just stop me and you can and pull me back. But there's two
Okay.
sort of main areas. So consumer protection law really was a product of the 60s and 70s. You think about the civil rights movement. And part of that movement was, again, to protect individuals. And so there's a whole panoply of consumer protection laws were built at that point in time, around mortgages, around financing, around credit reporting, around debt collection, around banking. So a bunch of laws were created. And some of the fundamental principles of those laws was that you had a right to go to court if somebody took advantage of you. It also and allowed, so that was one fundamental piece of it. Over the last 15, 20 years, what the court has done is taken away people's right to go to court by the way they
Mhm.
interpret contracts. There's this concept called forced arbitration, which you may have, but you can almost any consumer contract you see on page 20 and hidden somewhere deep in the contract, it says that you're giving up your right to take them to court. You're giving up the right to participate in a class action. And
Mhm.
sometimes class actions is the only way to get rights because when they're cheating, thousands of people at $5 a head, they're making a lot of money, but it's really
Mhm.
hard to bring a case for $5. So those contracts, the courts have allowed those contracts to be interpreted and saying that consumers have agreed to it, even all they've ever done is clicked on a button. So the courts have
Okay.
been very favorable in sort of saying, there's a court case called Concepcion back in the day that basically said that courts that when a consumer clicks on a button, they are bound by arbitration and no longer can take them to court. More recently, the court has interpreted congressional law to make it much harder for consumers to enforce it. There's this principle called standing, which basically means that you have a right to bring a case. And the
Mhm.
court has very narrowed the ability of consumers to bring the case. You have to show, even though Congress has established that if a company does this to you, it's a violation of the law. The court has said that even if they violated the law, unless you can show actual harm to yourself, you're not allowed to bring that case. And that has
Okay.
really restricted consumer rights as well. So
Mhm.
we have seen the court really narrowing the ability for consumers to protect themselves in favor of big corporations who have exploited consumers over the
Mhm.
years.
So, how does it work for a consumer who has been exploited? They contact NACA or one of your members directly?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, any consumer who feel like they've been taken advantage of by a credit card company, by a mortgage company, one of the things they should do is I think it still exists. I don't think our terrible administration has taken that down yet, but there's a complaint database that's really important that people file complaints with at the CFPB, the Consumer
Mhm.
Financial Protection Bureau. That complaint database is chock full of information. Once upon a time, it was very useful up until about a year and a half ago, where the enforcement agency would actually use those complaints and hold companies accountable. But it's still really important to file those complaints. You can contact your local consumer agency. You can contact your local AGs. State AGs have the authority to enforce consumer protection law, and it's important that consumers complain to them because they won't take action unless there's a lot of complaints. But more people, if there's a
Mhm.
number of complaints against the company, they might actually take action. And then there are private consumer. If you're low income, you should contact your local legal services program. Every community should have one, a legal aid program that does some sort of consumer protection. And then if you're low income or even any consumer, you can contact consumer protection attorneys. And oftentimes, the best way to find a consumer protection attorney is simply going to our website, which is consumeradvocates.org. We have a find an attorney button. And if you search the subject matter that you're concerned about or the location that you're in, you can usually find a consumer attorney in your area
Mhm.
who may not be able to take your case. I can tell you that again, they're overwhelmed, that it's not
Mhm.
easy, and there are lots of reasons why attorneys can't take your cases, some of which I outlined before because of the limitations that have been placed on consumers bringing those rights. But I think that would be your best step
Mhm.
is if you're looking for an attorney to help you, either go to legal aid or come to our website at consumeradvocates.org and look at the find an attorney button and try to identify someone who might be able to help
Is there any hope that the CFPB would be bolstered or there be
you.
any new laws for consumer protection?
Talk to me in January 20th, 2029. Right now, we're holding on for dear life. There's a lot of there's litigation ongoing right now about protecting the CFPB. Our terrible administration ham-handedly tried to destroy the agency. Thankfully, because the law, Congress specifically provided that agency exists. Their efforts up to this point have been unsuccessful. But they have significantly weakened it. I mean, I've read report. I like the Department of Justice might do consumer cases there. Attorneys are leaving that agency by
Mhm.
leaps and bounds. The same thing with the CFPB and the Federal Trade Commission. Attorneys who are
Mhm.
committed to doing consumer justice have no home there. The work that you're
Mhm.
seeing out of the CFPB mostly involves collusive settlements with companies to try to get them not having to be responsible for their bad acts. Cases that were brought under the prior administration, the only thing we're seeing right now are settlements that sort of let them off the hook, or regulations that are designed to provide them with additional protection. So,
Mhm.
is there hope right now? There's still some good people left in that agency trying to sort of do the best that they can. But until we have a change in administration and we survive these next 2.5 years somehow,
Mhm.
then there's a lot of rebuilding that's going to be needed on the whole consumer. Unlike a lot of the infrastructure in this country that's being decimated, the consumer protection infrastructure is also going to be need to be rebuilt,
Mhm.
comma, hopefully January 20th, 2029.
What about in Congress, if there's a change of Congress, after the midterms?
I
Change in
think,
power?
I mean, it will stop the worst things from happening. It might
Mhm.
stop them from, I mean, again, they have just sort of unilaterally not followed the law and attempted to knock the agency down.
Mhm.
But the president always has the veto power. And so I don't
Mhm.
have any expectation that any laws that will actually help consumers will get passed. I mean, there'll be more hearings. There'll be more opportunities to hold the administration accountable for all the terrible things that they're doing. People who are being placed in charge of those agencies who are unqualified might not be able to get through once we have a change in Congress. We can slow down the destruction with the change in Congress, but any
Mhm.
positive is going to require a change in the current administration.
Mhm. And apart from filing the complaint, as you explained, if you are a consumer who's been exploited in some way, is there any other action to take to raise awareness about this or
Sure.
to encourage, a law change?
Well, I mean, again, I think you can bring a lawsuit if you can find an attorney to do it. You can theoretically
Mhm.
bring a lawsuit. Filing a complaint with those federal and state regulators is an important thing to do. I think it's really important to be engaged politically on your local and state and national level. Let Congress know how you're being treated. I know that it doesn't feel like they're being particularly responsive to the financial needs of Americans as we speak right now. I heard the president say something about he doesn't care about anybody's financial interest. As I think that was yesterday. Um, I think it's really, really important to let your local agencies and government officials know that you're being cheated and that you're sick of it. I mean, I know I feel it from my neighbors and my friends that they feel like they're being taken advantage of, that it's not a fair level playing field, that the power is in the hands of big corporate actors and not theirs. It's
Mm,
the everyday niggling fees that you keep getting charged that are just so, it's oppressive, right? I mean, you're just
mm,
paying more for everything. And a lot of those fees are simply ways to take money out of your pocket, but really aren't serving
mm,
any purpose. And so I think, if you write, you should write about it. If you speak, you should speak about it. If you meet your politician, you should talk with them. I think that unless there's a movement coming in the future that really pushes forward the idea that we need to have a better and more just economic system, a better and more fair
mm,
consumer marketplace, it's not going to happen on its own. We
mm.
know that, we know who pays for elections, and it's not your typical everyday moderate income consumer.
Yeah.
And regardless of party, we see often two times that they're more beholden to the interests that fund their campaigns rather than the folks who are out there living their lives. So I think it's
Mm,
really important. I think part of the movement that hopefully we will be seeing in the coming years will sort of need to address both the rollback in consumer rights and civil rights and women's rights. It's all of one being, and I think we really need to
mm.
push ahead on those things.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. It's all rolled up together to oppress everybody but the 1%, essentially.
It's true. I mean, as someone who's been doing this work for a long time, I've never seen it this bad. I
Mm,
think, I mean, we have fought businesses and corporations taking advantage of consumers. I mean, I've done it since I graduated law school 40 years ago. And I don't think I've seen a moment in time where I've seen more brazen behavior, more exploitive behavior, more sort of reckless behavior. Oh, well, to be fair, the financial crisis was pretty reckless too.
mhm,
But I mean, I mean, there's just so many bad things going on right now, taking money away from people who work hard for it. And there's so many companies out there exploiting. I mean, one thing I didn't even mention yet, but the whole cryptocurrency movement. I
Mhm,
mean, my one advice to anybody who's listening is stay as far away from that as possible. It's just a gigantic Ponzi scheme, and
mhm,
it's a system. It's a way of losing money ultimately.
mhm.
The use of AI and making determination. I mean, there's all these sort of new products that are being used to exploit you, and you just need to be really careful about it. I think we need to have a new economic movement, a new consumer protection movement, and I am hopeful because it's, I guess, the only thing I have to be is to be optimistic that at some point it will get turned around. I think every time I think we hit the bottom, this administration does something that's even lower. But I think we're close to the bottom right now, and I'm hoping that we will all lift each other up and rebuild an economic marketplace that's fair for everybody. Because it's not fair right now,
Yeah.
not by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, yeah, let's leave on a hopeful note
Mhm.
that, this is the bottom, and yeah, that's a great way to look at it. It's an opportunity to rebuild something much better, hopefully.
I think we have to think about it that way. I mean, I think when the New Deal was created in the 1930s, it was a reaction to the exploitation that led up to the Great Depression in the 1920s. When the
Mhm,
Great Society was created in the 1960s, it was led to some of the consumer protection laws and the Civil Rights Acts. That was in reaction to sort of all the Jim Crow laws and all of the exploitation that existed up until that moment. Well,
mhm,
I think a new Deal, a new greater society is right around the corner. I think it's not going to happen unless we make it happen. But I do
mhm,
think that these things are cyclical, and I think that all the things that we're seeing right now will lead to a reaction. And I think what I tell my staff and what I tell people I work with is we need to be ready. Right? They had their Project 2025 or whatever that monstrosity was, and we need to
the
be thinking in
Heritage
terms of what our
Foundation.
right. We need to be thinking about what our plan is for the future.
Mhm,
How do
mhm,
we build a fair economic system? How do we build fairer consumer protection laws? And we need to be ready. From on January 20th, 2029, we need to be ready with a plan to make this world a better place. And I think, like we saw in the 1930s and we saw in the 1960s, I think the 2030s will be an opportunity, 2029 and onward will be an opportunity for us to rebuild, learn the lessons. We've seen all the exploitation that's happened.
mhm.
We've seen our systems fail, systems that we thought were not going to fail. And we just need to be ready to rebuild. And I think we'll have that opportunity. I think we need to be ready to take that opportunity because this cannot continue the way it is. It's just not, it is not sustainable. People cannot be treated this way. Our economic system is simply not fair for most people who are working really hard, and we need to change that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ira, and thank you for the work you're doing at NACA.
My
And
pleasure.
that's it for today with me. Don't forget, again, to follow Gadfly City on Substack and YouTube. See you next